Hey, welcome to Overtime, where we take Sunday's message further. My name is Jeremy, and I'm your host. And this is a podcast where we just want to ask the questions that we think that you would ask as it relates to Sunday's message. And as we do so, we hope that it helps you grow in your life and your faith. With that being said, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of the podcasts that are coming out. Not only that, hit the like button, because when you do so, it helps us help other people. And if you ever have a question about Sunday's content or about Overtime, you can submit those to overtime@npaustin.com, and we will be sure to get to those in future podcasts. So with that being said, here's a quick recap of Sunday, and then we're going to jump into our conversation today.
Our strongest thoughts center around the labels we give ourselves. What if the labels we give ourselves are incorrect? It says, then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. And there she is with her label. The woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family because I have shown kindness to you. And that's exactly what happens. She could have very easily said, you know what, I'm just a prostitute, I am less than, what role do I have to play in anything bigger than myself? But she didn't. When you put your faith and trust in Jesus, there is now a new set of labels available to you. What labels get the most airtime in your life? There's one specific step that I want to leave every single person in here with, and it's simply to pray this prayer. God, help me see myself the way you see me.
Love on Sunday, you talked about J.K. Rowling's, like, kind of her story, her timeline. I thought that was super fascinating, a great way to start things. So I thought I'd start there before we get into all of our questions. So since I know you're a big Harry Potter fan, did you know that the most watched video on TikTok ever was a Harry Potter illusion?
No.
Yeah.
I did not know this.
It is the coolest thing. I'll send it to you. You have to watch it. It's really super cool. It had 2.2 billion views.
That's like a quarter of the world.
Exactly.
More than a quarter. Yeah.
But it's Harry Potter.
See, this is interesting because I don't have TikTok.
Yeah.
I don't like TikTok, although Ashley calls me out on it because she's like, you'll watch Instagram Reels, but you won't do TikTok. I think because of the amount of times I hear her say, I saw on TikTok today, and I just like, oh my gosh. So I've avoided getting TikTok even though I watch Instagram Reels, but.
But have you seen this on Instagram Reels?
No, I have not. Okay, so I'm gonna have to.
You'll love it. It's really good.
Sweet.
Okay, so keeping in that lane, so Harry Potter we think is popular a lot because, or not mainly because, that he's the storyline is all about this character relationships, right?
Right.
And so the characters in the story also have labels,
right?
So I'm gonna throw out a few names and you tell me what comes to mind. Okay. So we'll start with Harry. That's easy. So Harry Potter.
Yeah, he's brave. He's courageous. He is also like a little socially awkward, but he's like very caring, and he's all. I was thinking about this. Like, what would I? You're not supposed to type people on the Enneagram. Yeah. What would I Enneagram type the Harry Potter characters? That's there's a new level of nerd right there.
That's okay.
I think Harry would be like a 3. Because I think he's like, I don't know, I think he's set to achieve but he does it from a very caring place. So like maybe 3-wing 2 but he's also very creative. So he's got that 4 aspect of him too. And so I don't know, that's where I put Harry.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So what about, let's go with Ron.
So I'm more confident on my Enneagram typing with Ron.
Okay.
I think he's a 9.
Okay.
Because he's like pretty laid back, pretty chill. And, he also does not like, when you see him doing the homework and stuff in the books, he almost like never does his own work. Like he's pretty much like whatever. But when he goes to like his strengths, he becomes this like achiever, like in the later on books when he like, he does awesome things. It's like, okay, cool. That's great. But then he's pretty laid back. So
okay.
You don't think 6? I thought 6.
No, 6 in unhealth because a 9 goes to 6 in unhealth. We're getting Enneagram deep in the tunnels here with Harry Potter characters. But I think Ron would be a 9.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know who can confirm or deny that for us.
I'm sure it's out there somewhere.
Yeah,
I'm sure this has been done.
Yeah.
Okay, so then what about Hermione?
Okay, Hermione's a 1 through and through.
Okay.
Yeah, she's a perfectionist.
Yep.
She is by the book. Anytime they were going to break the rules, it was like a huge deal, and they're,
Right.
but she is, she's just by the book perfectionism, like 100%.
Yep.
But then, I think a 1 goes to 4 in health. That could, maybe that's unhealth. I don't know. I don't know 1s as well. I'm a 6. So there's this like 6-3-9 dynamic that I'm a lot more familiar with. But 1s, I think when she does like go to health, she like is more open with the outcome, and she's more creative and, lets things go, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think so I agree with all of your labels, but throughout the movies, I feel like their labels did kind of change.
Oh, yes.
A little.
Yeah,
right?
well, they grew up a little bit too,
Right.
From 11 years old to like 17 years old in the last one.
Yes. So
Yeah.
I feel like Hermione then became more gritty and rebellious,
100%.
So I think we can learn from Harry Potter that labels can be changed.
Yep. And
Right?
why you shouldn't
And
type
why you
people
shouldn't.
on the
Yeah.
Enneagram. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So because of that, I always have to bring something fun. We're going to keep Harry out here.
Oh my gosh.
So that we can remember to be more like Harry,
That's
because
so good.
you remember he learned as he went through the storyline that you can't always make these assumptions about people, like Snape, for example, right?
Oh yeah.
And that was a big turning point for him.
Man, you've jumped into this tunnel with me.
I have.
It's fantastic. It's like speaking my love language
See,
right
I
now.
knew you would love this.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, that's it. So now we're gonna be more like Harry.
Okay, cool. I like it.
Okay. So jumping into, first of all, I thought Sunday's message was amazing. Loved it. Thought you did a great job with that. I loved the story. You talked about Rahab, the prostitute, and the label that was associated. But the title of the series the title of this message was "The One Who Ignored the Labels." And I loved that. I thought that was great. So as we get into, we touched on labels, but can you tell me or give us some idea, where do labels come from? How does that even get started?
Yeah,
Where do we develop those?
I think that's huge. And I would point out first and foremost too, Andy Stanley has this quote where he says, like, always teach from your like greatest insecurities, always teach from your greatest things you're working on, and you'll never run out of content. And this was very true with me. Like, this feels like a very personal journey I'm on right now. And there's layers to it, layers to an onion that I'm peeling back and realizing and understanding. And I just want to acknowledge that, because I know that I am 28 years old talking about, like, identifying, and most people say, like, I finally discovered who I am when I turned 30. And I'm like, so I'm very much so like in the process. But I think what I would like to do in this podcast, and even from Sunday, is just to be able to share what I'm discovering on this journey in hopes that it helps other people. And one of the questions that I pose at the end is, what labels are getting the most airtime in your life? And part of identifying those labels is going, where did those things come from? Because you find the root, not just the symptom, right? The root cause of what's going on. And I think there's 3 specific places that we find labels pop up from in our lives. I think one is very simply just cultural narrative. There's a certain even thinking about what was considered beautiful like 200 years ago versus what is beautiful now, and the labels we give ourselves based on what beautiful looks like. That has changed over the years. What a man looks like 200 years ago versus what a man looks like now. Like, all those things have changed, and they continue to change. And so I think we get labels from just culture, narrative, what's on the media, what's in the biggest movies, stories, and what is the pinnacle of like success and bank account, what your bank account looks like, things like that. I also think we get it from our past. This probably is a huge bucket that encompasses a lot of different things, but I've been on the other side of so many people, so many stories who have said, my dad said this when I was 10 and I never forgot it. Or, I had this experience, or my coach did this, or some really like very traumatic experiences that somebody had when they were like 5 years old. I remember I did a story video for a group that was starting. It was a trauma group, and they shared some of the things. I'm not going to share them here, but just about what happened when they were 5 and how those have been labels, things that they've carried in themselves into like, they're now in their 40s. And so like you think about just how trauma can create a message in our mind of you are nothing, or, something like that. So our past is a huge bucket, and I think we can get labels both in like the bigger areas and the smaller areas of our past too. Like just even small experiences, like, in school, not doing as good in school, or, something like that. It can just be a broad range of things. And then I think the biggest one I think that we do is just what we do, our actions, our habits, like day to day to day to day. my least favorite question when I'm on the other side of someone is, what do you do for a living? Because then I have to say I work at a church, and then it gets weird, and they're like, I'm sorry, I cussed back there. It's like, okay, totally fine. Don't care about any of that. But we so associate as a culture, like who we are with what we do.
Right.
So meet somebody. Hey, what's your name? Awesome. I'm Jeremy. Oh, what do you do for a living? Boom. It's the next question. So it's like literally from a cultural standpoint, we identify their name, and then the next piece of information that we take to identify them is what they do day in and day out. So in a lot of ways, who I am is what I do. And that's a cultural thing too. And so that can be just difficult because we so associate, and there's certain personality, we were talking Enneagram a second ago, certain personality types that would associate who they are with what they do a lot heavier, a lot stronger than others. So I think those are three: our past, what we do, and just our cultural narrative. Those are three places I see most labels coming from.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think a lot of us too, think it may not even be something that was said to us directly, but a perception that we held on to. Yeah. And then everything after that was formed by the perception we thought that someone thought of us. Yep. And that became who we were.
100%.
So I think that, that happens. And, I remember being told that you always make careless mistakes. So what did I do from then on out? I gave it my all if it was going to kill me from then on out, because I'm like, that's not who I am. But when I was treated like that, and it made me work that much harder. Well, fast forward into adulthood, then those are things now you got to work. That's the baggage you brought with you that you have to undo, because that wasn't a true label. But I took that to heart as a kid, and then this, whole thing developed out of something that wasn't even true. Yeah,
it's super tough for us to disassociate ourselves, who we are with what we do. Right. And I think especially, I'm a very new parent, but I've learned from Buck and just other parents here at Northpoint a lot about even the language we use as parents to our kids. There's this, Brene Brown talks a lot about the difference between guilt and shame, and this is a mind-blowing concept if you've never kind of separated these two concepts of guilt and shame. Guilt, very simply, is I did something bad and I feel guilty for it. Shame is I did something bad because I'm a bad person. And so separating those two is really important, because shame just wreaks havoc in your life. You hate yourself. I mean, you are just this shame cycle, and it's because I am bad and I did something bad. Well, because of that, now I'm just going to keep doing the bad things that I don't want to do because I'm bad, and that's just who I am. And so you find yourself in this cycle, and it's really hard to disassociate yourself. And that's part of, separating from your labels, going, it's really part of walking with Jesus too, as I talked about, is moving into the new set of labels is not a destination, it's a journey, it's over time. Right. And part of the brain switch is being able to go, yeah, I fell short, but I'm still washed white as snow. Yeah, I fell short, but when God looks at me, he still sees Jesus, even though I shouldn't have done that, versus I fell short, man, God must be so mad at me because I'm so bad again. You know what I mean? And that's a really tough thing for us to kind of separate from. But it's so prevalent in the who I am, what I've done, who I am, what I've done,
Well, and I think it also, when we feel that way about ourselves, it's hard for us not to treat other people with that same kind of judgment. And so I think a lot of the, we've been talking over the past several weeks about kind of the, the state of the world, and we're less unified, more divided than we've ever been. And I wonder how much of that is that we haven't become curious enough about ourselves to peel back those labels and figure out where did that come from, and understand ourselves, so then we can remove those labels and extend that grace and kindness to the person across from us. Yeah,
that's a great point. I've someone somewhere, I don't remember who, talked about how when we point out somebody else's shortcomings or whatever it might be, we are so quick to ask for people to not assume character flaws when they see things that we fall short with. So we make excuses, but then when we see someone else fall short, we automatically make a character assumption. Yep. We don't make excuses for other people. We automatically go, oh, they are that way because they're bad, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Something that always sticks in my head is when the Monica Lewinsky, stuff was going on with Clinton. In my mind, I'm like, this poor woman. It totally made me so sad to think, that's forever who she is, defined by something she did. I mean, how sad. And what if we all were labeled by the worst thing we did?
Yeah, what if we all walked around with that like on our shirt or something?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
the whole world. And think about just us as not famous people. Imagine the pressure and the labels that get put on Kanye West, for example. Like he was just on the BET Awards, I guess, given P. Diddy or Sean Combs his award or whatever. Well, and it just blew up online about, oh, he's crazy and like, all these labels for this guy, and no one stopped. Okay, he's working through some mental health issues, or we just label him. He's crazy. He's whatever. So I think it's, I'm thankful I'm not super famous, so that when I make mistakes, it's not blasted everywhere.
Yeah,
but it's so hard to overcome those labels once they're assigned.
Yeah, no, 100%.
So how can we learn? Well, actually, let's back up. We've kind of talked a little bit about the danger in labeling. But I think sometimes labels aren't always bad. So do you have any thoughts to share about labeling when it could possibly be a good thing versus bad? Is there a time when it's okay?
Well, I think it's okay if we're labeling ourselves based on what's true of us in Christ.
Yeah.
In a sense, we're saying, I think there are good labels that have negative consequences.
Right.
But I think labeling is a good thing when I'm going, no, that's the old me. No, here's the new me, is I'm a son of God, or I'm made in the image of God, or I'm valuable.
Yep.
I think that makes more sense, and that's true, and that's why posing the question of what if we're operating in our lives with false labels, like that's a staggering question, because if our labels drive our thoughts, our thoughts drive our actions, and then if our very first kind of chain in that whole reaction is an incorrect label, well, we're not living out of what's true of us, and so we've got to switch that label to become something that is true of us, so we can kind of reap the reaction in our lives from that as well.
Yeah, and it's so much harder to believe the good labels or label than it is to believe the bad.
Yeah.
So how can we kind of ignore labels? Like, how can we be more like Rahab? How can we learn, like, okay, yes, I was this and I've done this, but that's not who I am. How can are there things we can do to kind of ignore those past, or kind of peel back the layers? And
Yeah, 100%. I think, again, part of it is identifying where it comes from. One of the things I didn't mention too is I think we end up getting a label in our past because partially it's like coping mechanisms, and this takes more of a licensed like therapist, counselor to really unpack this well. But there's a book called Self-Esteem. It's almost like a textbook. I think her last name is McKay.
Okay.
And it's really fascinating because it really breaks down this like internal critic that we all have. And one of the things it says is that our internal critic, or the person who labels us this thing, or that part of us that does that, it's called the imposter, or other things that other various resources call it. That thing does that in an attempt to protect us, because if something happens in my life that makes me feel less than, it's far easier for me to tell myself I'm less than and kind of hurt myself that way than to find it out later on.
Yep.
And so in a lot of ways, your imposter tries to save you from greater pain by telling you something earlier, so that you don't have to deal with that pain as much later on, because you already know that thing is true. Yeah. And so that's, I think, how these labels develop in our life. They become coping mechanisms in a lot of ways, where something happens and we go, well, that's just who I am. And that's easier for me to accept that now than having somebody say that to me, in the future. So I think that's really important to point out as we talk about like ignoring labels and what that means. And one of the things that I think is just helpful in ignoring labels, there's a lot of, there's such a blend of like what secular society and mindfulness and like all of these things. And then, you just look at the New Testament writers and Paul, and there's Romans 12 where he says, don't conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That renewing of your mind is the process in which we ignore the old labels. But what we so often do, I think, is we go on defense, not offense. And so we go, let me defend against the bad thoughts. But really, like, the bad thoughts, they're like a trail that has become a Grand Canyon in your mind of these like paths that you have woven your whole life. You can't just ignore them. You've got to replace those with new trails in your mind. You've got to write new neural pathways. And we did a series on this back in September called Remodeling Your Mind. But specifically the labels, you have to identify what's true of you. And there's the Philippians verse that I love. Let me see if I can find it so I can just say it correctly. Where's that at? I wrote it down. Oh, it's right there. There we go. It says, and now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing. Fix your thoughts on what is true, honorable, right, pure, lovely, admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. And it's this idea that I'm not just going to go on defense against the bad thoughts. I'm actually going to make an honest effort to think about things that are true of me, things that are true and honorable, right, pure, lovely, admirable, all of that. And that is creating new neural pathways in our mind. So yeah, I think that's, just some of the things.
And I think it's, and to take that a step further too, I think it's not, I don't think anywhere are we told, does God instruct us to don't acknowledge those things. So if there's a truth about yourself, yes, you did that, or yes, you said that, or what have you, but that's not who you are. So I think it's not only think about these things. It's take that and then turn it around to say, yes, that I did this. It's not who I am. And then take a step and rewire your brain instead of just saying continually to yourself, I am a loser, or I'm not enough, or whatever that is. Yes, I did this. I made a mistake. I got laid off. I, stole something. I don't know, whatever. And then rewiring it, that's not who I am. I am. And I think you shared a couple of podcasts ago, a journal entry, and that's what popped in my brain, where you rewrite and you start with the truth and then write. Can you share that? Is that applicable?
Yeah. My it's one of the things I have to do, because I find myself often getting so stuck in these ruts, these mental ruts where I'm thinking a certain way and I cannot get out of it. And so what I have to do, and this has become, Ashley just knows, I got to grab my journal and I got to go somewhere alone. And, which has become much harder with children, by the way. But what I do is I go, I write down, I fill in the blank, but I know, or let me rephrase this. What we tend to do in our minds is we tend to go, I know I'm made in the image of God, but I just feel so ugly. And we go, I know that I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, but I just feel like I'm a terrible husband, or I'm a terrible wife, or I know God gives me everything I need for life and godliness so I can be a great dad, but I just feel like I'm falling short every single day. So what we do is we negate the truth with what we feel. And so we start with what we know, and then we negate it with what we feel. So flipping the script is going, I feel like I'm falling short as a dad every single day, but I know that God gives me everything I need for life and godliness. And so we're starting with what we feel, and we're surrendering that to God, and we're replacing that with what is actually true. And for me, that's been so helpful when I find myself in those ruts. And I'll just go back and say, and I feel like I'm a broken record on this podcast, journaling, I don't know how you do this kind of stuff without physically writing things down, journaling those things. It's just been so life-changing for me. Even recently, my counselors had me just kind of unpacking something that I'm, another layer of the onion, I guess. And I found myself yesterday going I'm bumping into this thing. And he told me, next time I bump into this thing, grab my journal, go write down what's happening. And I did that this morning, and I was like, man, that sucks. But okay, now I can see it on paper, and it's tangible, and I can actually say, okay, here's exactly what's going on in me. Let me figure out how I can rewire and kind of submit these things to God, and believe something different.
Well, I think it's intentionality behind it too. And I think our brains get so cluttered that I agree with you. I think it's really hard. You can think new thoughts, but I think there's something about writing it down. It's like you're using so many different, you're writing it down, you're seeing it, you're reading it. It's more focused, I think, when you write it and read it and continue to do that. It becomes more ingrained, I think, than just our brains are so cluttered. I just think it's hard to separate that out and really just focus on that truth and what we're rewiring.
And I think it helps the people on the other side of us too, because when I'm in a rut and I can't get out of it, Ashley's going, where'd my husband go? He's not even with me right now. He's somewhere off in his mind. And to me, a level, an emotion becomes, on a scale 1 to 10 becomes a level 10. And then I end up just ruining a Saturday, because of it, versus if we can that's why I love Paul's language, take the thought captive and make it obedient to Christ. If we can grab those things, take them captive, put a name to the emotion. Okay, I'm angry, or I'm annoyed at what's happening here. Okay, well, that's now the level 10 came down a little bit. Now it's more of a level 2, level 3, and I can deal with it. And
I think it's good it just helps us break it down and put it in perspective. And then I do think that it also opens us up to receive, we can hear God's voice sometimes. Well, I can, more prevalent when I've written it down and you're writing it, and when you kind of read it back, you're like, wow, okay, I kind of get it now. And you have to wonder, is it, God really speaking through you, letting you learn about yourself through your own writing. I mean, it's, and again, I just think our brains are there's so much noise all the time, literally and figuratively, that I think being able to separate it down and give space for God to tell us the truth and see that, it does so much and moves us so much more forward than I think it would otherwise.
Yep. And I think we have to give ourselves grace in the process of
For
discerning these things too, because I think especially when we initially begin to follow Jesus, we're like, okay, I gotta be good,
Right.
but sometimes if we filter our emotions, we miss out on what God is trying to teach us.
Yeah.
And Brennan Manning has this quote where he says, emotions are neither good or bad, they're just an indicator of what is going on inside of us.
Yep.
And so if we're able to take that and go like, I am operating out of both my flesh and, the Spirit of God in me, but let me take what's happening right now, and it may be even more of on the fleshly side of things. Let me take it and discern what it is, even though it's not going to be pretty.
Right.
But give myself the grace enough to do that, to try to like get out on the other side, better for it.
And I think we label so much. We label our feelings, we label ourselves, we label each other. But I think initially, it's to help us compartmentalize and understand, like put it in perspective. And I don't think that's a bad thing, but I think then we got to take it a step further and then break down, the whys, the be curious, the, do all of those things with that, because I think it's human nature to label, because that's how our way of making sense of things. So like our emotion, we think a thought or we feel something and that's either good or bad. And we've learned, and I think it's, it's very normal for us to feel like it's this or this, and it's not this and this. So I think we get stuck in that black and white, it's this or this. And so, I think the labeling part initially is not horrible. It's what we do with that and how we use that to explore ourselves. That is the part we need to take a step further with. So let me ask you so we were talking about Enneagram things, and I really focus on, and I don't know why, but I go to the fears. I always think that I feel like I know so much more about someone when I understand their core fear, because it makes sense to me how we operate out of that. And I think oftentimes that can be a label. So, for example, going by the types, like 1 has a fear of being wrong or lazy, 2 is unloved or wanted, but the list goes on and on. It's worthless, disrespected, meaningless, not knowing, being out of control, not being able to confront. All of these things I feel like could potentially come from a label, like something that we were either told or experienced, that then gave us this label that now this is everything we do operates out of this. So I'm curious to know, do you feel like that those fears are have any truth to them? Do you feel like those are all false labels? Do you feel like it's just a mindset thing that we work to undo? What are your thoughts on those core fears as being labels?
I think that the core fears are just really helpful to identify what's going on in us in a way. So the one that I can most relate to, because I am, is a 6, so fearing chaos. So there are things in my life that I can point to being a kid and remembering wanting to kind of bring things together into a controlled way that's manageable. And even today, Buck and I have conversations where if I don't have, and some people, if I don't have clarity on something, or things feel a little out of control, or, Sunday mornings for me are my biggest work day of the week because just of my role and everything. And so it can feel, if things are chaotic, I have to get control quickly. And so I know that for me, when I am most unhealthy and I'm trying to get control really quick because I'm so afraid of things being chaotic and out of control, I go to that 3, which is an achiever. So what I'll do is I will work and work and work and drive to get things back to a controlled place. But the healthy version of me goes, things are out of control, but I'm just Jeremy. God is in control. And so the healthy me goes to more of like the healthy aspects of a 9, which is surrendering to God and going, God, I'm going to trust you with the outcome of today and tomorrow. And I'm going to recognize I can't control everything no matter how hard I try. Right. And but you can, and I trust you with that. And so I think those labels, like those Enneagram numbers, sometimes we use them as like a cop-out. Sometimes we're like, well, here's this behavior, but I'm just wired this way, so I don't have to do anything about it, And that's not true. It's a tool to help us regulate and be more self-aware, so we can operate out of God's labels in our life. You know, that's that. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, it did. It totally did. And I think that's I think those are just telling us our way of interpreting the world and managing our emotions. It doesn't have to be a label. It can come from something, but it doesn't have to be that. So I think we get into trouble when we try to do all of these things on our own. So like on a Sunday morning, for example, if you're like, oh my gosh, this is all on me, then I think we go down this this hole of, going into these fears, right?
Right.
So I think when we back up to answer some of these questions kind of in a, I guess one big answer is when we're trying to do this alone, the labels, that's what screams the loudest. I think when we can ask God to intervene, ask him to show us the truth, help us to operate, I think that's when our best selves comes out. I think that's when the labels don't matter as much. It doesn't mean they're never going to matter. I think it's not a linear thing, to your point, you said earlier, it's a journey. So we might get better and realize the labels aren't correct and rephrase that. And we might do great, for a few weeks, and then we have a week and something happens and we take a few steps back.
Yep.
So what advice would you give on continuing that journey so that we can continue to recognize the labels and to not live according to them?
Yeah, I think a couple of things come to mind. Samuel Chan, he wrote Leadership Pain, and he just says you'll only grow to the threshold of your pain. And so labels are a painful thing to lean into. Because it causes us to go back to our past. It causes us to confront our failures and our faults. But it's really important to do so because, and this is one thing someone had me do once, is the cost is pretty great. I mean, the cost, and God is sovereign, and I don't know how all that shakes up and works out, but the cost of not submitting these things before God means that we're passing things down to our kids, that we are unaware of it too. We're unknowingly doing things to the most important people in our life, the most important things in our life, and it's just going to lead to regret. And so choosing to face that pain now versus experiencing that pain later on in life is one thing I would just encourage people to do. And like you said, it's really difficult to do this alone, getting on the other side of some trusted people, and not always just your friend who's going to affirm everything you say, but getting on the other side of somebody. And sometimes you got to pay somebody to do that. That's where counseling comes in, you pay somebody to tell you what you don't want to hear.
Right.
And I think just being humble enough to accept that. I had one, being a six, liking to be in control what's happening. Sometimes I go into counseling and I'm like, I think I got a pretty good handle on things right now. Yeah, I just want to check in, and then I think it was one time Ashley was sitting next to me and we were talking, and I think eventually he just goes, man, Jeremy, Jesus would have been so lucky to know you. And I was like, oof, that's pretty much a, sucker punch, and I think because my tendency is to be more like the Pharisees, to be more in control, to, all that kind of stuff. And when he said that, one of the other things that he's had me say is when I bump into something I feel like I'm at fault with, is just to say to myself, it's probably worse than I think. And, I probably only see like 10% of how jacked I am, and God sees a whole lot more, and it's probably worse than I think. And so one of the mantras that I've kind of come up with when I find myself bumping into things is I just say, God, it's probably worse than I think it is, but my entire sense of self is in Jesus. And so I'm going to be faithful what you've called me to do, because I am enough, and the same power that raised Christ from the dead lives in me. And it's kind of just a series of sentences I say to myself a couple times a day that remind me it is worse than I think. But God's grace is big enough.
Yeah.
And so I think being super, having to face, look in the mirror, honestly, be objective. And that's what I love about, maybe we'll end it with Harry Potter again. I would love to be, maybe this is a bad ambition. I would love to be one of those Dumbledore-like people one day, those sages that, but the thing is, you can't offend them.
Yeah.
Anytime you're like, you this, they're like, you're right. They're so dang honest at their faults and their shortcomings that you can't offend them. Yeah. But they're also so dang driven and self-aware to know what's most valuable in their life and what's most important, that they're so set on it. And Pete Scazzaro, he has a book called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, and he talks about this idea of being self-differentiated, meaning no matter what anybody else throws at you, you don't get offended because you're so dang focused on your own values and your own principles in life, what is most important to you, so nobody else throws you off track. But I only think that comes from operating out of God's labels for us in our life. Yeah. And I think that's where extreme humility, introspection, knowing it's going to be painful, but understanding there's a cost now or there's a cost later.
Right.
Allow the cost to happen now so you can experience the benefit later in life.
Yeah.
And just allowing God's grace to work through you in that. So
Yeah, for sure. And I think then that allows us to stop harming ourselves and stop letting other people harm us, and we can be that self-aware and know that, yes, these few things are true, not everything is true, and the truth, the real truth, the only one we need to focus on is the value and the worth that we have with God, the way God sees us.
Yep.
So,
and I want to be clear here too, because I know I said on Sunday there's an old set of labels and a new set of labels, and so when I say it's worse than I think it is, I'm referencing the old set of labels. Like those are more prevalent, more active. Those are worse than I think it is. But the new set of labels, those are the things that God says about me are true. And so I just wanted to make sure, when you're in Christ, this is now true of you, but it's probably worse than you think it is in terms of how you're operating and what you actually think you're operating out of, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
so
total sense. And I think that's just a good reminder to have grace with ourselves, knowing that because it is worse than we think it is, just to be aware of and acknowledge that is going to be a struggle and a challenge, but that we have these new set of labels. Well, they're not even new; they've always been true. That really, that's the focus. So even though this is ugly, this is not, and this should take more of our energy, and we can just practice and get better and better at that. And I think God, the more we go to Him with that, the more He's able to give us the tools and the thoughts to overcome those lies, those labels we've placed on ourselves.
And I would just encourage anybody listening, when you hear the idea that it's maybe worse than you think and you push back on that, I would challenge anybody who feels that to ask themselves, what in you wants to push back on that? What sense of pride or what sense of things are in you that potentially are causing you to want to defend yourself, because Jesus died for all of our broken pieces, and sometimes we try to hold those pieces up and go, this is not broken though. And it's like, no, that's a broken piece too.
And I think that's why journaling is another reason why that's so good, is to write those down. And it is painful to go revisit those or to keep peeling back layers, but I think it's so valuable, and not just because it dictates the course of the rest of your life, but to your point earlier, to future generations. I mean, if we're not able to sit down and peel back those layers that are uncomfortable, and really get to the, where did this come from? Where did this label come from? Was it a person? Was it an experience? Was it myself? Was it, what happened? And kind of peel back even the most ugly ones and sit with it, even if you don't have resolution right then. I think that journaling lets you put those down on paper where you can revisit and go back, and whether that's with some, a therapist, a trusted friend, what have you, and be vulnerable enough to share the most painful parts. I think until you do that, there's not an opportunity really to kind of continue to move forward. It's always going to be kind of weighing you down. So there's definitely value in getting uncomfortable. And sometimes you find out, I found out journaling things that I'm like, I've had to sit with it a really long time because I really don't know where it came from, or I really don't have an answer for that. And so I think it's okay to sit with that, and you have to ask yourself, what's the cost and what's the value for me and for my family? Now for me, especially with children and a husband, it's like super important for me to face those things and try to be honest with myself going through the pain, because no one wants to do that, so that the legacy that I leave and the effect that I have on my kids is one where they can see more truthful labels of who they are, so I'm not passing my false labels onto my kids, and 100%. it's a process. I've gotten better verbally. My facial expression still needs some work. So I'm working on that one.
And just know, whoever's listening, if you do the work, God will meet you.
Absolutely.
God will meet you in those moments and those tears and whatever it might be. And he'll lead you and he'll guide you and he'll give you whatever you need in that moment to be able to sift through whatever that might be and come out on the other side being more sure of yourself in Christ.
And it's okay to just say to God, I don't even know. It's totally okay to say, He can handle that. And I think it's even more, He'll jump into that even more when He can help show you and rewire. And so I 100% agree with that. So, okay, so we can wrap up with Harry if you want. I mean, since he's here, I feel like we should.
I like it.
So I think what we can take from Harry Potter is that people aren't always what they seem. We're not always what we seem. I think Harry learned, he grew, he matured, not just with age, but he was very curious. He remained curious. So I think we should all remain curious about ourselves and others. I think we should get to the bottom of it like Harry did, figure out where these things are coming from. And then I think then just giving that all over to God. God's a Harry Potter fan, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure. So I think if we can just be curious, identify our labels, and give it to God like Harry Potter, we'd all be just fine.
There are some parallels in the Harry Potter story and the Jesus story. So.
Yes, I agree.
But take that with a huge grain of salt, anybody who's listening. Goodness.
Deep for that one.
I know. Well, actually, Jordan Peterson does it. He wrote 12 Rules for Life, and then he has 12 More Rules for Life, which is the best title for the second book. But he has a ton of Harry Potter things in it about, like, you know, the parallels between Jesus and Harry Potter. So anyways, we can wrap up with that, though.
Okay, good. That
a good
was
idea.
fun.
Yep.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks, Christy.